and you're all very welcome. Thank you all for coming here this evening on this beautiful evening. So for well over 200 years, so much has been written about the life of Sarah Curran. She was the youngest daughter of the highly acclaimed Newmarket-born John Philpott Curran. She was also a singer, a musician, a poet and an artist. Publications with tales of her trials and tribulations have been told throughout the world, ranging from poetry and articles in journals and memoirs to books on her life. This oil and canvas painting that you'll see here is entitled Miss Sarah Curran Playing a Harp. It was painted by the famous artist William Beechey about 1805. It is housed in Banfield Museum in Halifax in Yorkshire. The portrait is full of symbolism and imagery from the harp with its strings that resemble drops of rain, her unshed tears and her green and gold shawl, and the suggestion of a volcano or turbulence in the background. It is fortunate that some records of Sarah Curran's life survive today that confirm her vast array of talents. The National Library of Ireland holds her handwritten letters, as well as some sheets from a music book with her notes and sketches, and also a beautiful map of Ireland that she created. The Royal Irish Academy Library is home to 2 of her poems, and amongst the Benjamin Ivey Library collection in Farmley House in Dublin are 3 of her poetic compositions. This Midsummer's Night event is a tribute to the life of Sarah Curran. Tonight's historically rooted event will be celebrated in music and song with the melodies of the renowned Irish poet Thomas Moore, who was acquainted with the Curran family. At the outset, I want to give special thanks to Mossy England, who put forward the idea for the evening a while ago, and for his eagerness to pay tribute to Sarah Curran in this way. As we go along, Philip Linhan and I will provide a brief narration of some of the key events that marked Sarah Curran's short life. The selected melodies will be sung by Ben Quinlan and Maeve Walsh. Of course, the night would not be complete without hearing the music of the harp, which was one of the instruments that Sarah Curran played. The lovely harp music you heard earlier, and will hear again later, is performed tonight by Viha and Mahalid O'Leary. The slides you will see as part of the narration are a combination of portraits, photographs, but mostly illustrations by Abby Reynolds, who is also here, I'm delighted to say. Now, we will go straight through without a break this evening, so that you will all be well at home to mark the sunset on this summer solstice. So, in the townland of Copsfield, near Stannard's Glen, about 2.5 miles from where we are now gathered, lived the highly acclaimed lawyer and politician John Philpott Curran and his wife Sarah Cray. Karl Marx described Curran as the greatest people's advocate of the 18th century and the noblest personality. Built in the late 1770s, their house overlooked a glen through which the Onanar River flows. The residence, no longer in existence, got its name Priory from John Philpott Curran's role as prior of the monks of the Order of St. Patrick, commonly called the Monks of the Screw. This was a society dedicated to advancing the cause of placing the Irish Constitution and commerce on the same legal basis as Great Britain. John Philpott Curran was born in a house which, long gone, stood on Main Street, at or close to today's front gates of St. Mary's Church. He was the son of James Curran, who was a seneschal or steward on the Aldrich estate at Newmarket Court. His mother was Sarah Philpott, whose great-grandfather, Nicholas Philpott, married Lady Anne Albert. And it was lovely that we received best wishes from abroad for this evening from descendants of the family and from those with us here also. John Philpott Curran's wife, Sarah Cray, was the daughter of Dr. Richard Cray and Gertrude Armstead, who lived in the townland of Killone in a house no longer in existence. Together, John Philpott Curran and Sarah Cray had 10 children. Amelia was born in 1775, followed by Richard, then Sarah Gertrude, then Emily Maria, then Eliza Odella, then Gertrude again, then Sarah Sarah, who was born in 1782 and we were talking about tonight. And she was followed by John, then by James, and the youngest was William Henry, who was born in 1789. Now, Sarah, being the sixth and youngest daughter, continued a name that was popular on both sides of her family. Her mother was Sarah Cray, as mentioned earlier. Her grandfather, on her father's side, was Sarah Philpott, whose mother was Sarah Wigton. Now, surrounded by her family, Sarah's childhood years were, in all likelihood, contented and happy as she played at the foot of Priory Bridge and enjoyed growing up in Newmarket, where her musical and singing talents were nurtured.
From his infancy, John Philpott Curran was familiar with the native Irish language, and in his youth he frequently attended weddings and wakes here in Newmarket. He is remembered in this area for his successful defence in the case of a priest called Father Neil, who brought an action against Lord Doneraile for an assault and battery. Lord Doneraile, who had ridden out to the priest's house and while still on horseback, had raised his hand and directed a number of blows against the elderly priest for condemning a parishioner from the altar, safe in the knowledge there that a Protestant jury would not convict him. However, John Philpott Curran, who interestingly, through his mother's Albert family line, was related to Lord Doneraile, represented the priest and won over the jury with his eloquence. As soon as the trial was over, John Philpott Curran was asked to make a public apology or to meet Lord Doneraile for a duel. He decided to risk his life above his reputation, and a duel took place. Noticing that Lord Doneraile's pistol was aimed wide of its mark, John Philpott Curran called on him to fire and avoided the bullet. John Philpott Curran did not return Lord Doneraile's fire, and so the duel was terminated. Shortly after the monks of the screw were formed, John Philpott Curran, having been one evening called upon for a song, gave one of his own compositions. This was immediately adopted as the charter of the order, and here is the first of its 4 verses. When St. Patrick this order established, he called us the monks of the screw. Good rules he revealed to our abbot, to guide us in what we should do. But first he replenished our fountain with liquor the best in the sky, and he swore on the word of a saint that the fountain should never run dry. Now, to our first melody of the night, appropriate to the liveliness of the monks of the screw, who held their meetings at the priory. The song will be performed by Ben. Come, Sin Round the Wine.
Come sin round the wine and leave points of belief to simpleton sages and reasoning fools. This moment's a flower too fair and brief to be withered and stained by the dust of the schools. Your glass may be purple, mine may be blue, but while they are filled from the same bright bowl, the fool who would quarrel for difference of view deserves not the comfort they shed o'er his soul. Na 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 Shall I ask the brave soldier who fights by my side the cause of mankind before creeds agree? Shall I give up the friend I valued and tried if he kneel up before the same altar with me? From the heretic boy of my soul should I fly, seek somewhere else a more orthodox kiss? No perish the hearts of the lost and tried, true failure or love by a
John Philpott Curran spent many years defending United Irishmen, the most famous of which were the brothers Henry James Shears, William Orr, Napper Tandy and Wolfe Tone. His parting words to the jury in July 1798, in the case of Oliver Bond, included, "My old friends, I tell you, that if you surrender yourselves to the mean and disgraceful instrumentality of your own condemnation, you will mark yourself fit objects of martial law. You will give an attestation to the British minister that you are fit for and have no expectation of any other than martial law. And your liberties will be flown never, never to return. Your country will be desolated or only become the jail of the living until the informer, fatigued and slaughtered and gorged with blood, shall slumber under the sceptre of perjury. No pen shall be found to undertake the disgusting office of your historian, and some future age shall ask, what became of Ireland? Do you not see that the legal carnage which takes place day after day has already depraved the feelings of your wretched population, which seems impatient and clamorous for the amusement of an execution? It remains with you. In your determination it lies. Whether that population shall be alone composed of 4 species of men, the informer to accuse, the jury to find guilty, the judge to condemn, and the prisoner to suffer." As a rising barrister with a growing ambition, John Philpott Curran's work took him more and more frequently to Dublin. In about 1790, he acquired a residence with gardens and some land south of Rathfarnham village. The entire family moved from Newmarket, bringing with them the name of their former residence, Priory. From 1790 until his death in 1817, the Priory in County Dublin was the main residence of John Philpott Curran. Having reached a position of eminence and honour at a young age, his public success continued to grow throughout his final decade there, defending many cases, including, as mentioned previously, the leaders of the Irish Rebellion of 1798. Yet, it was during this time that the family suffered a series of sorrows, including the tragic death of 12-year-old Gertrude in 1792. She was only 2 years older than her sister Sarah when she died, as a result of a fall from a window at the Priory. Such was the grief that her father arranged for her to be buried in the grounds of the Priory, in a place which could be seen from the window of his study. The years passed by, and John Philpott Curran continued his work, which sometimes took him overseas, then more commonly referred to as the continent. And during these times, he would keep in contact with home. On an occasion when in Paris in 1802, in a letter to his son Richard, he wrote towards the end of it, "Say how Eliza does. Tell Amelia and Sarah I do not forget them. God bless you all, J.P.C." Now, we'll go to our next melody, a song believed to be in remembrance of those killed in the Irish Rebellion of 1798, which Maeve will sing, "The Minstrel Boy."
Minstrel boy of the war is gone, and the ranks of death you will find him. His father's sword he had girded on, and his wild harp slung behind him. Land of song, cried the warrior bard, the world betrays thee. One sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee.
older brother Richard was a classmate and best friend of Robert Emmet, the Irish patriot who helped to create the Irish nation. They both entered Trinity College Dublin in 1793 to study law, and it was through Richard that Sarah Curran met Robert Emmet. The renowned poet Thomas Moore, whose melodies are being performed tonight, was a fellow law student of Curran and Emmet. There was a keen interest in music in the Curran household. John Philpot Curran's son, William Henry Curran, who was also a barrister, said about his father that one of his most usual and favourite times of meditation was when he had his violin or violoncello in his hand. He would thus forget himself for hours, running voluntaries over the strings or executing some trivial air while his imagination was far away collecting its forces for the coming emergency. Thomas Moore remained a friend of the family and was one of a small number of people who attended the private funeral of John Philpot Curran in London in 1817. The next melody was written in praise of King Malachy from ancient times. Thomas Moore said that Robert Emmet used to sometimes sit beside him when he played. One day, when he had just finished playing this next tune, Robert Emmet exclaimed, "Oh, that I were at the head of 20,000 men marching to that air which Ben will now sing, let Erin remember the days of old."
Sons betrayed her when Malachy wore the colour of gold. She won from her proud invader, where kings with standard of green unfurled, led the red branch knights to danger, ere the emerald gem of the western world was set out in the crown of a stranger, on Loch Nee's bank as the fisherman strays, where the clear leaves declining, he sees round the towers of other days, and the way beneath him shining. Thus shall memory of dead and dreams sublime catch a glimpse of the days that are over. Thus I look through the waves of time for the glories they faded to cover. Let Erin remember the days of old, where her faithless sons betrayed her, when Malachy wore the colour of gold, which she won from her proud invader, where kings with standard of green unfurled, and the red branch knights to danger, ere the emerald gem of the western world was sent out in the crown of a stranger.
The Curran family had many talents. Sarah was gifted musically. It is said that Sarah's unofficial music teacher was Thomas Moore, and that he taught her a number of Irish airs. It is also known that her sister Gertrude, who died aged 12, had shown exceptional promise. Records show that Dublin-based Ferdinand Weber built a piano to the order of Sarah's father, John Philpot Curran. And in 1800, John Hammond supplied a specially built harpsichord for the Curran girls. Amelia was the eldest of the family and a talented musician, painter and writer. Here we see some of her works, probably the closest we will ever get to seeing them all together in one place. She is noted in particular for her portrait from 1819 of the famous poet Percy Shelley when she lived in Rome, shown on the top left. This is now housed in the National Portrait Gallery in London. It is the only portrait of the poet painted while he was alive. She also painted Shelley's son William, top right, who unfortunately died of malaria within weeks of the sitting. This painting can be viewed in the New York Public Library. On the bottom left is a portrait of Claire Claremont, a stepsister to Percy Shelley's wife, Mary Goodwin. This painting is on display at the ancestral home of the poet Lord Byron at Newstead Abbey in Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire. Amelia also painted Mary Shelley, but this has been lost. On the bottom right is Amelia Curran's Madonna and Child painting, which hangs a little bit closer to us in the Church of St. John the Baptist in Blackrock in Dublin. Interestingly, she was also commissioned by Canada's Newfoundland government to do a large painting which represented an officer of the Royal Navy in full dress shaking hands with an Indian chief. This was part of a campaign to bring about peace between the settlers and the natives. Unfortunately, the painting seems to have been destroyed in a fire over there in 1846. Amelia died in Rome in 1847, and her memorial, shown in the middle of the slide, can be seen at St. Isidore's College in Rome. I was just thinking to myself that Amelia's works would make for a very interesting tour from Newmarket.
After the Irish Rebellion of 1798, Robert Emmet toured Europe to review firsthand how smaller countries had fared under Napoleon Bonaparte. Ireland was then nominally an autonomous kingdom with its own parliament, but in reality it was a client state controlled by the King of Great Britain and supervised by his cabinet in London. The Republican model for Robert Emmet was not France, but America. He was prepared to accept French support, as the Americans had, but was clear they could not come to Ireland on specific terms and leave once the independent Irish Republic was established. Just as the United States and Britain had become allies, Emmet looked to a similar future for Britain and an Irish Republic. It was the principle of British rule that Emmet rejected, and he saw no reason why the two countries should not work together in the future. In the meantime, the Act of Union of 1800 merged the Kingdom of Great Britain and the Kingdoms of Ireland to become the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. This resulted in the Irish Parliament being abolished. Emmet returned to Ireland in the autumn of 1802 and was asked by veterans of the Irish Republic of 1798 to plan another rebellion. He accepted the offer. In contrast to the previous rebellion in 1798, his strategy was to ensure secrecy of the rebellion, which was to take place on July 23rd, 1803. The plan was to seize Dublin Castle in a coup d'etat and then coordinate uprisings around the country. There are a number of accounts that Sarah Curran and Robert Emmet first met at a ball in Wicklow in 1799, before Emmet set off to the continent. On his return, he was in the habit of visiting John Philpot Curran's house. He formed an attachment for Sarah, although her father was not aware of this until subsequent events made it known to all. Now, we move to the next melody, where Thomas Moore lets the Hill of Tara symbolise the seat of Irish government. Tara having been the ancient seat of the power of the High Kings of Ireland. The harp, as a traditional musical instrument of Ireland, symbolises the Irish people and culture and the spirit. Maeve, together with the O'Leary sisters, will now sing The Harp That Once Through Tara Halls. Unfortunately for Emmet, on the 23rd of July 1803, his plan went quickly wrong. The government did not know what was going on, but neither did most of his potential rebels, and it proved impossible to mobilise them at short notice in Dublin. He expected 2,000 men, but about 80 turned up. The plan disintegrated before Emmet's eyes, and the fighting soon fizzled out, but not before Lord Kilwarden, another Trinity man, was killed by the rebels. As a former politician and judge, Lord Kilwarden had gained the respect of many members of the United Irishmen for his efforts to help the Irish revolutionary Theobald Wolfe Tone in the 1798 rebellion. Emmet escaped to his leased house in Butterfield Lane in Rathfarnham on the night of the insurrection, and then to the Wicklow Mountains, but he soon returned to Dublin and began living in lodgings at Harold's Cross. During this time, he had meetings with Sarah Curran, and letters were carried by Emmet's devoted housekeeper and heroic friend, Anne Devlin, to and from the Priory. Emmet's house was raided on the evening of the 25th of August 1803, and though he made a brave dash to escape through a window, he was tackled to the ground by the Chief of Police, Major Henry Sir. He was then taken to Dublin Castle, and the date of 19 September 1803 was set for his trial. While in Kilmainham jail, Emmet put his trust in a prison officer to carry a letter to Sarah Curran. However, she never received the letter. Instead, an order was made by the Chief Secretary, William Wickham, for the Priory to be searched. The order was carried out by Major Sir and an armed escort who arrived on 9 September 1803, while Sarah was still asleep. There is a line in Sarah Curran's own 7-verse poem called On Hearing the Death Watch that goes, "When yielding to the burst of midnight woe, thy boding accent struck upon my ear." This shows the effect the raid had upon her. Appropriate to such an awakening, Ben will now sing the melody at the mid-hour of night.
At the mid-hour of night, when stars are weeping, I fly to the lone fairy love, when light shone warm in thine eye. And I think that if spirits can steal from the regions of hell to revisit past scenes of the light, you will come to me there and tell me your love is remembered even in the sky. Then I sing the wild song 'twas once such pleasure to hear, when our voices commingling breathe like one on the ear. And as echo far up through the veil my sad orison rose, I think, oh my love, is the voices from kingdom of souls, fainted answering still the notes that once were so dear. At the mid-hour of night, when stars are weeping, I fly to the lone vale we love, when life shall warn in thine eye. And I think that if spirits can steal from the regions of air to revisit past scenes of the light, you will come to me there
trial of Robert Emmett, which ran for 12 hours, took place at Green Street Courthouse on the 19th of September 1803. He stood throughout the entire ordeal with his hands chained and without a break for food or refreshment. Despite such restrictions and amid interruption from the judge, Lord Norbury, Emmett delivered one of the greatest orations in history. This reputation owed much to the brilliance of Emmett's closing statement. My lords, you are impatient for the sacrifice. The blood which you seek is not congealed by the artificial terrors which surround your victim. It circulates warmly and unruffled through its channels, and in a short time it will cry to heaven. Be yet patient. I have but a few words to say. My ministry is now ended. I'm going to my cold and silent grave. My lamp of life is nearly extinguished. I've parted with everything that was dear to me in this life for my country's cause, and abandoned another idol I adored in my heart, the object of my affections. My race is run. The grave opens to receive me, and I sink into its bosom. I'm ready to die. I've not been allowed to vindicate my character. I have but one request to ask at my departure from this world. It is the charity of its silence. Let no man write my epitaph, for as no man who knows my motive dares not vindicate them. Let not prejudice or ignorance asperse them. Let them rest in obscurity, and peace, my memory, be left in oblivion, my tomb remain uninscribed, until other times and other men can do justice to my character. When my country takes her place among the nations of the earth, then, and not till then, let my epitaph be written. I have done. Emmett, who was summed up years afterwards by Reverend Archibald Douglas, who knew him well, as so gifted a creature does not appear in 1,000 years, was charged with high treason for leading rebellion against the king, and he was sentenced to death. He was led away by guards to Newgate Prison and was later removed at midnight and brought to spend his final night at Kilmainham Jail. To try and imagine the thoughts running through Emmett's head on his last night, Bill will now sing Oft in the Stilly Night.
Oft in the stilly night, ere slumber's chain has parted, fond memory brings the light of other days around me. The smile, the tears, the boyhood years, the words of love unspoken, the eyes that shun, now dimmed and gone, the cheerful hearts now broken, tossed in the stilly night, ere slumber's chain has bound me. Sad memory brings the night of other days around me. When I remember all the friends so linked together, I've seen around me fall like leaves in wintry weather. I feel like one whose treads alone some banquet hall deserted, whose lights are fled, whose garlands dead, and all but he the as party. Sad memory brings the light of other days around me.
On the morning of the 20th of September 1803, Robert Emmet, who wanted a future based on tolerance, hope and forgiveness, was taken out of his cell at Kinmainham Jail and brought to the gallows opposite St. Catherine's Church on Thomas Street in Dublin, where he shook hands with the hangman and declared that he died with sentiments of universal love and kindness towards all men. His body was taken down and beheaded. He was 25 years of age. An extract from Robert Emmet's letter to Richard Curran, written at 12 o'clock on the day of his execution, relating to Sarah Curran, states, "I never did tell you how much I idolised her. It was not with a wild or unfounded passion, but it was an attachment increasing every hour, from an admiration of the purity of her mind and respect for her talents." On the 20th of September 2023, it will be 220 years since the execution of Robert Emmet. Yet the image remains gruesome. One can only imagine how those nearest and dearest to him then managed their grief through such a difficult time. The aftermath of the event undoubtedly left its mark on his immediate family members, as well as his best friend Richard Curran and his idol Sarah Curran. Thomas More himself said that he composed "O Breathe Not His Name" as a result of Robert Emmet's dying words that we heard earlier. Maeve will now sing "O Breathe Not His Name."
Oh, breathe not his name, let it sleep in the shade, where cold and unhonored his relics are laid. Sad, silent and dark be the tears that we shed, as the night dew that falls on the grass o'er his head. But the night dew that falls, though in silence it weeps, shall brighten with verdure the grave where he sleeps, and the tear that we shed, though in secret it rolls, shall long keep his memory green in our souls.
The trauma of Robert Emmet's arrest, imprisonment and execution weighed heavily on Sarah's head and heart, and she was significantly impacted for months afterwards. As soon as she could be moved, her sister Amelia arranged for her to stay with friends. Sarah went firstly to stay with the family of the Reverend Thomas Crawford, who was a master of the endowed school at Lismore and was known for running a very flourishing classical school. He was one of the oldest and dearest friends of her father, and they had been fellow students at Middleton College. Sarah had previously spent a number of years at the same household from when she was about 12 years old, and returned to the Priory in Rathfarnham in 1799. Her friend in Lismore, Melusina Lovett, who later married Reverend Henry Woodward and lived in Feathered, years later in 1831 wrote a first-hand account of Sarah's appearance. She said, "When I first saw her, she was in her 12th year, and was even at that stage remarkable for a pensive character of countenance, which she never afterwards lost." The account stated that in person, Sarah was about the ordinary size, her hair and eyes were black, her complexion was fairer than is usual with black hair, and was a little freckled. Her aspect in general indicated reflection and pensive abstraction from the scene around her. Her wit was keen and playful, but chastised, although no one had a quicker perception of humour or ridicule. Her musical talents were of the first order. She sang with exquisite taste. I think I never heard so harmonious a voice. Now, in recognition of the wonderful harp, we go to the next melody which Thomas Moore was inspired to compose after visiting his friend Edward Hudson in Kilmainham Jail in 1798, and he showed him a picture he had drawn on the wall there with charcoal, which he called The Origin of the Harp. Hudson was in Kilmainham for being a member of the United Irishmen. He was a dentist in Dublin and a collector of ancient Irish music. Ben, together with Viha and Mahalet, will now sing for us The Origin of the Harp.
Tis believed that this harp which I weigh now 40 was a siren of woe to some under the sea, and who often at eve through the bright waters rolled to beat on the green shore a you to she loved. But she loved him in vain, for he left her to weep, and in tears all the night her gold dresses to see, till heaven looked with pity on true love so warm, and chained to this soft heart the sea maidens born. Still her bosom rose fair, still her cheeks smiled the same, while her sea beauties gracefully formed the light frame, and her hair as let loose o'er her white arm it fell, was chained to bright chords uttering melody spell. Hence it came that this soft heart so long had been known to mingle love's language with sorrow's sad tone, till love is divide them and teach the fond lady to speak love when I'm near thee, and grief when away.
In the autumn of 1803, Sarah moved to Woodhill in Montenotte in Cork and stayed there until the winter of 1805. This was a family home of Cooper Penrose, who was a leading merchant prince of 18th century Cork. Woodhill was known as the Irish Vatican for its art collection. Cooper Penrose and his wife had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Cooper Penrose had engaged John Philpott Curran in the case of Mary Pike, who had inherited a fortune from her father, a banker in Cork. She had taken refuge in Woodhill in 1797 after a family disagreement, and her fortune attracted a widower who concocted a scheme of abducting the heiress so that she would marry him. John Philpott Curran was brought down from Dublin to prosecute the abductor, who was convicted in 1801 and sentenced to transportation to Australia. It was during this period that the Curran and Penrose families became friendly. Woodhill was a lively place for music and entertainment. It overlooked the River Lee and had beautiful gardens. Access to the house ran from Tivoli on the southern side and from Lover's Walk on the northern boundary. During the summertime, Sarah would go off on carriage drives and sailing in Cork Harbour and on the family yacht, the Gossamer. As the days went by, Sarah slowly began to recover her health, and her new lifestyle helped her to get back to some degree of normality. The two daughters of the house, Anne and Bess, who were both older than Sarah, did all in their power to make her happy at Woodhill. Music provided a great bond between the Penrose sisters and Sarah. The next melody, to reflect Sarah's happy times at Woodhill with her circle of friends, will now be performed by Maeve with a little backing from me. Believe me, if all those endearing young charms.
Believe me, if all those endearing young charms which I gaze on so fondly today were to change by tomorrow and fleet in my arms like fairy gifts fading away. Thou wouldst still be adored at this moment, thou wilt let thy loveliness fade as it will, and around the dear and each wish of my heart would entwine itself ardently still. It is not while beauty and youth are thine own, and thy cheek refined by a tear, that the fervor and faith of thy soul can be known, to which time will but make thee more dear. Oh, the heart that has loved never truly forgets, but as truly lives on to the close, as the sunflower turns on her god as he sets, the same look that she gave when he rose.
While Sarah was staying in Woodhill, she met a young British Army officer named Robert Henry Sturgeon at a ball in Cork. Better known as Henry Sturgeon, he later became Wellington's master builder of military bridges in the Peninsular War. It is likely that Henry Sturgeon, having been promoted as a captain of the Royal Staff Corps in June 1803, was in Cork to oversee some engineering projects such as Martello Towers and other permanent defence structures. Henry Sturgeon was the son of Henrietta Watson Wentworth from Wentworth Woodhouse in Yorkshire, and her Irish-born husband, William Sturgeon. Henry's mother was the sister of Charles Watson Wentworth, notable for his 2 terms as Prime Minister of Great Britain. Prior to his marriage to Sarah, Henry met his future father-in-law, John Philpott Curran, at dinner in Cork, at the home of a Bullen family, a name that would have been familiar to the Curran household due to a Newmarket connection. It is said that John Philpott Curran had a high admiration for the young officer. Sarah Curran and Henry Sturgeon were married on the 24th of November 1805 at Racooney Parish Church in Glanmire in Cork, an attractive landmark with its beautiful spire and its towering location over the Glasheboy River, and just over a 2.5-mile carriage journey from Woodhill. The newly married couple lived in England before Captain Sturgeon was ordered to Sicily as part of the British government's Mediterranean strategy to strengthen the island's defence fortifications. In a letter written at the end of October 1806 from Tangier Bay, Sarah described a long journey to Sicily and how the poor little ship was tossed in every direction except upside down during the gales in the stormiest season of the year. Everyone dined in the cabin while sitting on the floor, sliding from one side to another as the ship rolled, and as she said, an unhappy goose literally nailed down to keep it steady. With a plate in her lap, she said she never laughed more in her life. The convoy had departed Plymouth in England some days earlier with a fine breeze, which she described as a flay in comparison to the swells of the Atlantic and the Bay of Biscay. The fleet under the command of Sir John Duckworth had anchored opposite North Africa's Tangier for enough wind to try and land in Gibraltar. They expected to stay 12 days in Gibraltar and hoped to reach Sicily in 3 weeks. While anchored, her younger brother John, who was in the Royal Navy, came on board and brought news that their father, John Philpott Curran, was likely to be elected for Westminster, at which they were very pleased. Having been on board ship a considerable time, Sarah wanted to see some new faces, new dresses, and she ordered shoes by post from London's Bond Street, which was the heart of the city's fashion back then. Once the winds changed after 8 days tossing around in the Strait of Gibraltar, Sarah amused herself drawing and to the convoy past Gibraltar without stopping there. On the theme of water, the next melody was inspired by a visit of Thomas Moore in the summer of 1807 to a romantic spot in Wicklow, where 2 rivers meet. Wicklow was a place well known to Sarah from her younger days, and it was also known to Henry Sturgeon, whose father lived there. Ben will now sing The Meetings of the Water.
There is not in the wide world a valley so sweet as the vale in whose bosom the bright waters meet. Oh, last rays of feeling, and life must depart ere the bloom of that valley shall fade from my heart, ere the bloom of that valley shall fade from my heart. Yes, it was not the nature that shed o'er the sea her purest of crystal, the brightest of green. 'Twas not her soft magic of streamlet or hill. Oh no, it was something more exquisite still. Oh no, it was something more exquisite still. 'Twas the friends, the beloved, my bosom were near, who made every dear scene of enchanted more dear, and who felt how the best charms of nature improve when we see them reflected from looks that we love, when we see them reflected from looks that we love. Sweet fair love of Volca,
Italy in Messina in Sicily, Sarah and Henry were hoping to settle there for some time and see more of the island. Sarah remarked that it was a long time since she had felt so happy and tranquil as then. She was content with the climate, which she said was far from being too hot and like our last days in autumn, and would continue for some months. Sarah found her acquaintances in Messina civil and obliging. She mentioned in particular one neighbour, Mrs. Fox, who lived very near and was very kind to her. Notably, Mrs. Fox was the wife of British Army General Henry Fox, who was in Sicily as Commander-in-Chief in the Mediterranean, and had held various roles in the army, including that of Commander-in-Chief in Ireland at the time of the 1803 uprising. As to Sarah's music and singing, in a letter at the end of December 1806, she said she had got the harp into order once more and would sing when she got rid of a cough she got the previous winter in London, and which the stone floors in Sicily had made worse than ever. Sarah's party pieces included the Scottish air, Had I a Cave, which she later performed there. Since her arrival in Sicily, Sarah was surprised to hear that musical people she had met there had never heard of Mozart's name. In a letter to her friends, she remembered with fondness the dear little circle which included from her time in Woodhill the Penrose sisters and writers Kate Wilmot and Anna Chetwood. Having been part of the great revival of the harp in Ireland, she said of Sicily that pianos were very rare and there were no harps at all. One of Sarah's favourite pieces, as I mentioned earlier, was Robert Burns' Had I a Cave, which goes to the air of the well-known Aileen Aroon. The same air is used in one of Thomas Moore's melody, which Maeve will now sing, Aaron, the tear and the smile in thine eyes.
Aaron, the tear and the smile in thine eyes blend like the rainbow that hangs in the skies, shining like sorrow streams, saddening true pleasures beam by suns with doubtful gleam, weep while their eyes. Aaron, thy silent tear never shall cease. Aaron, thy languid smile near shall increase, till like the rainbow's light thy various tints unite and form in the heaven's sight one arch of peace.
In one of her letters, Sarah talked about a long tour of Sicily in March 1807 to see the people and visit the famous antiquities. She marvelled at seeing so many places, including Taormina. Henry and Sarah travelled in a litiga, a carriage for two people who sit facing each other, carried on long poles and driven by mules. There were very few roads in Sicily at that time, and most of their journey were on mountain paths where only mules and goats could climb. In some parts, the mud was so deep as to cause the mules to plunge in suddenly up to their heads. Sarah said they fortunately chose March for their tour, while the weather was tolerable and some days charmingly pleasant. Sarah had lovely memories of the myrtles, violets and jessamines that grew there. She considered Taormina to be the wildest and loveliest spot in nature, and as she stood on its valley, she thought of the old Corinthian, Tamerlane, landing there way back in 344 BC when he came to give liberty to Sicily. Thomas Moore said little did he know that the melody "She is Far from the Land" would long be associated with the memory of Sarah Curran. Ben will now sing "She is Far from the Land."
She is far from the land where her young hero sleeps, and lovers around her sighing. But coldly she turns from their gaze and weeps, for the heart in its grave is lying. She sings the wild song of her dear native plains, every note which she loved awaking. A little they think who delight in her strains, how the heart of the mistress is breaking. Oh, make her a grave where the sunbeams rest, where they promise a glorious morrow. They'll shine or sleep like a smile from the west, from her own loved island of sorrow.
Throughout her time in Sicily, Sarah maintained an interest in fashion and inquired of her Penrose friends about the latest trends, referring to the order by post for shoes that she had made to London while her trip was anchored in Tangier, and having received them many months later, Sarah confirmed that the shoes fitted extremely well and were a perfect treasure for her. Her passion for shoes was supported by the butler named Alday when she had stayed in Woodhill in Cork. He wrote in a letter, which can be seen today, that Sarah would be sick in her stomach whenever she owed the shoemaker an amount she described as big as a summons. Now, then, in a letter from Sicily at the beginning of July 1807, Sarah told her friend Anne of a subject very dear to her heart and the prospect of becoming a mother. With her hopes and dreams, Sarah said that, on the whole, she would enjoy the place very well, provided there were no earthquakes there. Now, to celebrate Sarah's love of dresses and shoes, Maeve will sing the next Thomas Moore melody, a ballad written in praise of King Brian Boru's leadership and laws. Rich and rare were the gems she wore.
Rich and rare were the gems she wore, and a bright gold ring on her finger she bore. But oh, her beauty was far beyond her sparkling gems or snow white wand. Lady, dost thou not fear to stray so lone and lovely, though in this bleak way our air and song so good or so cold as not to be tempted by one nor gold? Sir Knight, I feel not the least alarm. No son of Erin will offer me harm. For though they love the golden stone, Sir Knight, they love honour and virtue more. On she went and her maiden smile in safety lighted around the green isle, and blessed forever it is she relied upon Erin's honour and Erin's pride. Rich and rare were the gems she wore, and a bright gold ring on her finger she bore. And oh, her beauty was far beyond her sparkling gems and snow white wand.
Writing at the end of September 1807, Sarah mentioned what she termed as a vexatious removal from Messina. It had become necessary for Henry and Sarah to move from Messina across the mountains to the port Milazzo, some 30 miles away, in the event that the army had to evacuate. This upheaval had exhausted Sarah's spirits a good deal. In January 1808, Sarah wrote 3 letters from Portsmouth within 1 week to Anne Penrose, telling of her plight and imploring her to visit. In the first letter, Sarah says she was hardly able to write, and that she had suffered great misery and hardship on a stormy passage of several weeks on a crowded ship after the garrison had to evacuate Sicily in haste. She'd been taken into labour the day after Christmas Day, but no boats could be hoisted for her. She lay on the floor of the cabin where no fire could be made, with the freezing cold paralysing her. From the first hour, the child's cries disturbed her, but Sarah was grateful for God's mercy that saved her and her child. Child was born a month before time as a result of her hardships on board ship. In the next letter, Sarah was writing with the sad news of her child's death. He'd been named Johnny, presumably after her father, John Philpott Curran. Sarah and Henry, after January 1808, moved from Portsmouth to London, where they had stayed at the home of Henry's aunt, Lady Charlotte Wentworth, and then to Hyde in Kent, where Henry was once again based with the Royal Staff Corps. In March 1808, Sarah wrote that she had a hectic fever, which so debilitated her that she was barely able to walk across the room. Sarah's brother, Richard, wrote a letter on the 8th of May 1808 from London to Sarah's friend Melusina. He confirmed that Sarah had died at 5:30 on the morning of the 5th of May of a rapid decline. He said he was on his way with her widower, accompanying her remains, which she wished to lie in her native land. He enclosed a lock of her hair that was cut off after her death. Sarah was 26 years old at the time of her death, on the 5th of May 1808 at Hyde, Kent in England. She was buried under a large walnut tree in the churchyard here in Newmarket, just to my left outside, which you can visit on your way out. Beside her grandmother, Sarah Philpott Curran, who died just over a year earlier in March 1807. Records give the names of inhabitants of Newmarket who attended the funeral and who remembered the late hour of the evening when the cortege arrived in the town. The walnut tree fell down during the big wind in January of 1839. In Sarah's memory, a Celtic cross was erected in 1898 by the people of Newmarket and is beside the rough stone that long marked her grave. Reverend John Chetwood of Rathcooney Parish in Glenmire was the father of Sarah's friend Anna Chetwood. He was also the rector who married Sarah Curran and Henry Sturgeon. He composed the following lines following the death of his young friend Sarah. So late adorned with every grace of mind, here gentle Sarah lies, to peace consigned. Thou soul of harmony, thy harp unstrung, rests the sad emblem of thy tuneless tongue. Thy pensive grace, thy tasteful genius gone, thy wit, thy playfulness forever flown. A while, to charm the earth, thy powers were given, but now sublime, they own their native heaven. These lines were intended to be inscribed on Sarah's tomb, for which her husband had sent a tombstone of Sicilian marble that never reached its intended destination, and ended up instead at Newbury, near Mallow. On the slide you will see, on the left, that Sarah Curran's burial place here in Newmarket is also marked by a stone tablet inscribed with SS, presumably for Sarah Sturgeon. On the right is what is said to be the headstone that was delivered to Newbury. A paper rubbing of the front of the now faded headstone, which is credited Donny O'Sullivan of Lumberstown, reveal what looks like an Irish wolfhound on either side of the central figure. Following Sarah's death, Henry Sturgeon continued in his military engineering career in the British Army in the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. He applied his skills to the fields of road and bridge building and was regarded as a man of fertile genius and great practical knowledge. Henry Sturgeon did not survive the Peninsular War and was killed in action near Vire-en-Bigorre in France on the 19th of March 1814. A widower since Sarah's death. He was about 33 years old. The death and character of Colonel Henry Sturgeon is given in History of the War in the Peninsula and the South of France by General William Napier, who in relation to the combat de Vire-Bigorre said, "The action was vigorous, 250 Anglo-Portuguese men and officers fell, and amongst them died Colonel Henry Sturgeon, so often mentioned in this history. Skilled to excellence in almost every branch of war, and possessing a variety of accomplishment, he used his gifts to gesture gently for himself, and so usefully for the service that envy offered no bar to admiration, and the whole army felt painfully mortified that his merits were passed unnoticed in the public dispatches."
It is 241 years on from Sarah Curran's birth in 1782 in Newmarket, where she was also laid to rest in a grave in 1808, upon which the sunbeams rest quite vividly. As said earlier tonight, Thomas Moore was inspired to compose the specific melodies "O Breathe Not His Name" for Robert Emmet and "She Is Far From the Land" for Sarah Curran. He also wrote the world popular and beautiful poem "The Last Rose of Summer," which was set to traditional music. John Philpott Curran would have heard the original version of this old air in his hometown here in Newmarket as a child. Following the tragic death of his daughter Gertrude, he received a gift of a rose known as Old Blush, also known as Parsons Pink, which had recently at that time been imported from China into Europe. The rose was unique at that time in that it bloomed throughout the summer until the first frost. He planted the rose on Gertrude's grave, which later inspired the song. I want to acknowledge the generosity of Newmarket's Raymond O'Sullivan for sharing his knowledge of the rose and other aspects of the Curran family history. We are very fortunate to have someone with Raymond's immense powers of recollection in so many aspects of historical importance and who has influenced so many people. The last melody of the night, a fitting one to end our tribute to Sarah Curran, will now be performed by Ben with a little backing from me. This is "The Last Rose of Summer." before we conclude this Midsummer's Night, I've outlined in this a way that you can travel virtually in the footsteps of Sarah Curran with an interactive map, which I think she would approve of. You're all very welcome to download that app. The details of it are actually given on the brochure that you have there, so you can do that. So now, to play us out, I'd like to call on Viha and Mahalat once again. And good night, and thank you all for coming. Right.